A penny, just one penny, and the decision it required was genuinely one of the most complex of your entire childhood. You stood at the counter, face level with the glass jars, and you looked for a long time. Because this was not a casual purchase. This was a strategic allocation of finite resources that had to be optimized across multiple competing priorities: sweetness, size, duration, and the highly important question of whether what you chose could be made to last the entire walk home or would be gone before you reached the end of the street. A cola bottle lasted longer than a flying saucer. A sherbet lemon outlasted both. But a blackjack gave you value in a different category entirely: the specific satisfaction of your tongue turning completely black, which was its own reward regardless of taste. The shopkeeper waited. They always waited. They had been waiting for children to make this decision since before you were born, and they would wait for as long as it took, because they understood instinctively that this moment mattered, that it was not trivial, that for a child standing at that counter with one penny and a row of glass jars in front of them, this was one of the genuinely important decisions of the week. If that just took you straight back, if you can feel that penny in your palm right now, then you already know exactly what this channel is about. Yesterday's Britain exists for everyone carrying these memories, the ones that seem small but aren't small at all, the ones that defined an entire world that has now almost entirely disappeared. If that is you, you are exactly where you belong. Stay with us and hit that subscribe button if you once lived in this world. The corner shop was not just a shop. In a working-class British community in the 1970s, it was the infrastructure of daily life, the place that held the street together in ways that nobody acknowledged openly, but everybody understood instinctively. It occupied a specific position in the terraced street that was almost never actually on a corner, despite its universal name. It was more often a converted front room of a terraced house, its domestic origins still visible in the ceiling height, the window proportions, the way the floor sloped slightly toward the back, just as every other house on the street did. The door announced your arrival with a bell, not an electronic beep, but a proper mechanical bell on a coiled spring that rang with a specific urgency the moment the door moved. In a busy corner shop on a Saturday morning, that bell rang almost continuously, a percussion of community arrivals and departures that was as much a part of the street's soundtrack as the milk float at 6 in the morning or the ice cream van on a summer afternoon. You smelled it before you fully registered where you were, a combination of smells that existed nowhere else on Earth and has never been successfully replicated since: newsprint and tobacco, sugar and paraffin, something faintly biscuity underneath it all. Rich tea, probably, or broken digestives sold loose from a tin. And beneath everything, the particular dusty warmth of a small room heated by the same single-bar electric fire positioned behind the counter for as long as anyone could remember. You knew that smell the way you knew your own kitchen. It was simply part of the fabric of the world. The layout of every corner shop was simultaneously unique and completely identical. A counter running along one wall, usually glass-fronted to display the cigarettes and tobacco behind it. Shelves floor to ceiling on every available surface, stacked with tins of baked beans, packets of tea, condensed milk, camp coffee, Spam, and every variety of household product that a working-class family might need between the weekly shop at the market and the next Friday's wages. In the window, faded advertisements for Woodbines and Brook Bond tea competed for space with handwritten price signs on pieces of cardboard. Above the counter, a flypaper strip hung in summer, rotating slowly in the warm air from the electric fire. The person behind the counter was as much a fixture of the street as the lamppost outside or the red telephone box on the corner. In many communities, it was Mr. and Mrs. Patel or Mr. Singh, families who had arrived from India, Pakistan, or East Africa in the 1960s and 70s and had taken on the corner shops that nobody else wanted, working hours that nobody else would work, building businesses through 7-day weeks and 6 in the morning starts that most of their neighbors would have found impossible. In other streets, it was an older English couple who had run the shop since before the war, who knew 3 generations of the same family by name, who could tell you what your grandmother used to buy on a Thursday morning 30 years before you were born. Regardless of who stood behind it, the counter was a place of remarkable intimacy. The shopkeeper knew things about your family that they never discussed and never judged. They knew whether your mum sent you in for cigarettes on a Wednesday, which meant it had been a good week, or whether she sent you for just the 1 packet of rich tea biscuits and a small tin of carnation milk, which meant a different kind of week entirely. They knew which families paid promptly and which families needed the credit book, and they maintained both categories with equal dignity because they understood that the difference between them could change with any given Friday's wage packet. The credit book was one of the corner shop's most important and most quietly compassionate institutions. A small notebook kept behind the counter, your family's name written on the cover in the shopkeeper's handwriting, a running total of what was owed recorded in pencil inside. When money was tight, and in a working-class community in the 1970s, money was frequently tight, you could come in, get what you needed, and it went in the book. No interest, no formal agreement, no humiliation, just a quiet understanding between 2 people who both knew how the world worked, and both knew that next Friday would come, and the balance would be reduced if not cleared, and the week after that the same, and that this was simply how things were managed between people who trusted each other. The credit book required trust on both sides. The shopkeeper trusted that you would pay. The family trusted that the shopkeeper would never make the debt visible or embarrassing in front of other customers. That trust was almost never broken, because the corner shop was not operating on the logic of a business. It was operating on the logic of a community, and communities work on different rules entirely. Being sent to the corner shop on an errand was one of the defining experiences of a working-class British childhood in the 1970s. You were given a list, sometimes written on a scrap of paper, sometimes delivered verbally with the instruction to remember it. A handful of coins counted out precisely and sent out alone. You were 7, you were 8. Nobody thought anything of it, because the corner shop was 3 streets away at most, and every person between here and there knew who you were and whose child you belonged to. The street itself was a form of supervision. The list was usually simple: a loaf of bread, a pint of milk, 20 Benson and Hedges, a tin of tomatoes, a packet of digestives. You carried it in your head or in your hand, and you walked to the shop with the specific purposefulness of a child who has been given a real job and intends to do it properly. You handed over the money, received the change, and tucked it carefully into your pocket, because arriving home with incorrect change was a significantly worse outcome than arriving home empty-handed. But somewhere between the tin of tomatoes and the front door of the shop, the penny sweets happened. Because the penny sweets always happened. The glass jars on the counter, or the low shelf beside it, were simply too close and too available and too important to ignore. You made your selection with the gravity the situation deserved, added it to the order, and subtracted the penny from the change with the mental arithmetic of a child who understood instinctively that this transaction needed to balance before you got home. The penny sweet selection was one of the great taxonomies of 1970s British childhood. Every child developed their own philosophy and hierarchy, refined through years of experience and extensive comparative testing. The flying saucer, a rice paper shell filled with sherbet that dissolved on your tongue in a specific sequence of textures. The white chocolate mouse, small, dense, and gone too quickly, but deeply satisfying in its brief existence. The shrimp, pink and chewy and vaguely prawn-flavored in a way that raised questions nobody asked. The licorice strip, a long, flat piece of licorice that could be rationed into sections and made to last the entire afternoon if you had sufficient willpower, which most children did not. The foam banana, soft and sweet and faintly artificial in its flavor, which was somehow exactly right. The gobstopper, the long game, the investment piece, the penny sweet that paid dividends over an hour or more as it moved through its successive layers of color and flavor, each one a small surprise. The shopkeeper counted them out with patience and precision, dropping each one into a small white paper bag that was twisted shut at the top, handed over the counter, and received with the solemnity of a significant transaction completed. Saturday morning was the corner shop's busiest and most democratic hour. Children arrived with their pocket money, 6 pence, 10 pence, perhaps 20 pence if it had been an exceptional week, and conducted their sweet purchasing with the focus of serious investors. Adults came for their newspapers, folded and ready behind the counter, your family's surname written on the top in pencil if you had a regular order. Older people came for their tobacco and their weekly chat, leaning on the counter for 20 minutes or half an hour while the shopkeeper listened and responded and remembered everything, because a good corner shopkeeper had a memory like an archive. The newspaper delivery was the corner shop's earliest operation and its most important daily rhythm. Somewhere around 6 in the morning, the papers arrived in a bundled stack, and the shopkeeper or their children sorted and folded them, ready for the delivery round or for collection over the counter. In many families, the paper was the first thing that arrived in the house every morning, pushed through the letterbox by a child on a bicycle who knew every address on the route by heart and could complete it in the dark, which in a British winter was frequently exactly what they did. The shop's role in the community extended well beyond the transaction of buying and selling. It was an information exchange, a message relay, a place where you found out what was happening on the street before anyone had thought to tell you directly. If someone was ill, the corner shop knew. If someone had a new baby, the corner shop knew. If there was a difficulty in a particular household, a husband out of work, a family fallen on harder times than usual, the corner shop knew and adjusted its approach accordingly, extending credit a little further, asking after people a little more carefully, without ever making the difficulty the subject of open conversation. It was a form of social infrastructure that had no official name and no funding and no recognition. It simply existed because someone had decided to run a shop on a street where people needed things and had discovered in the process that what people needed went considerably beyond bread and milk and 20 Benson and hedges. And then it began to disappear. Not all at once, not dramatically. The corner shop did not go out with a bang or a headline or a moment that anyone could point to and say, "There, that was when it ended." It went quietly, one shop at a time, over 2 decades, as the forces that killed it accumulated slowly and then all at once. The first force was the supermarket. Not the enormous out-of-town superstore that would come later, but the first generation of proper supermarkets appearing on high streets in the late 1970s, larger, cheaper, better stocked, and increasingly convenient as car ownership spread through working-class communities, and the weekly shop became something you drove to rather than walked to. The corner shop could not compete on price. It had never tried to compete on price. Its value was proximity, familiarity, credit, and community, none of which appeared on any balance sheet. The second force was the Sunday trading laws. For decades, the corner shop had operated 7 days a week, including Sunday, which was one of its most important trading days, because nothing else was open. The small shops, many of them run by South Asian families who were exempt from the laws that prevented larger retailers from opening, filled a genuine need that no other business was meeting. When the Sunday Trading Act of 1994 opened Sundays to the supermarkets, one of the corner shop's last remaining competitive advantages disappeared overnight. The supermarket was now open whenever the corner shop was open, and the supermarket was cheaper, and it had a car park. The third force was the most brutal and the most personal, the gradual erosion of the community itself. The working-class terraced streets that had generated the corner shop's customer base changed over the decades. People moved out. Families dispersed. The dense, interlocking social fabric of a street where everyone knew everyone and trusted the shopkeeper with their credit and their secrets became harder to sustain as mobility increased and anonymity replaced familiarity as the default condition of urban life. By the 1990s, the corner shops were closing at a rate that nobody had planned for and nobody had organized a response to. The buildings became takeaways or were converted back into houses or stood empty with their old signage fading in the window. The glass sweet jars were packed away. The credit books were closed. The bell above the door rang for the last time and then went silent. What replaced them was convenience. Genuine, undeniable, significantly cheaper convenience. You could now buy more things, more cheaply, at more hours of the day and night than any corner shop had ever been able to provide. Nobody could argue with that. The supermarket was objectively better at being a shop, but the corner shop had never really been just a shop. It had been the place that knew your name, that knew your family's account, that waited patiently while you decided between a cola bottle and a flying saucer. That kept the credit book without judgment and the community's secrets without ever being asked to. That rang its bell all day long and meant by that ringing that the street was alive, that people were moving through it, that someone behind the counter was paying attention to all of it. We did not lose a retail outlet when the corner shop closed. We lost a community institution that had been performing functions nobody had ever thought to put a name to, and whose absence left a gap that no amount of convenience has ever quite managed to fill. The penny only bought one sweet, but it bought something else as well, a moment of being known, of being waited for, of being part of a street that had a center. We have faster and cheaper and more convenient now, but we do not have that. Do you remember your corner shop? Who ran it? What did it smell like the moment you walked in? And what was your penny sweet of choice? The flying saucer, the gobstopper, or something only your street would remember? Tell us in the comments below. We want to relive those memories. If this brought it all back, please hit the like button and subscribe to Yesterday's Britain. There are thousands of us here keeping these memories alive together. Thank you for watching.